What is acceptable to God and what is unacceptable to God? Well, we know that by faith is acceptable. 2 verses later, verse 6 says this. Look at the first phrase right in front of the comma. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Right? That's one of Hebrews' most popular verses. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Was Abel pleasing to God? Yes. Was Cain pleasing to God? No. Yet they both offered a sacrifice. It had nothing to do with blood. It had everything to do with faith. So Cain doesn't offer his by faith. He's Cain. You know what I think Cain goes to his sacrifice and says, if it doesn't work, big deal. I'm Cain. I'm gotten. I'm acquired. I'm the one. Oh, you don't want what I got, God? Fine. I've seen people with that attitude to this day. Oh, God doesn't want what I have? Fine. I don't want anything to do with God. Because they approach God as if, I'll give you something, you ought to be glad to have me. I've had people approach the church that acted like we should have done backflips because they thought maybe they're going to go to Midland. We should have been so excited because, oh, look who's here. We lost one not long ago. They were never really, they're kind of like John. They went out from us. They were never really of us. They might have been here 3 times. And it was always like I'm either ignorant or stupid or stubborn because it took them leaving for me to realize what they wanted me to do when they were here. And that was really roll out the red carpet. I never invited them up to give a little speech. I never said so-and-so's here today so that we could all go, ooh, so-and-so's here today. And then we could elbow each other, go home and Facebook it, because look at how much we're growing, because if so-and-so ends up here, then the other so-and-so will end up here too. And then before long, we'll have a whole pew of so-and-sos. And if we could mix the so-and-sos up a little bit, it really raised the whole value of the... So either ignorant, stubborn, or stupid, I just kept getting up preaching Jesus. And gave absolutely no recognition whatsoever. And found out later from an outsider, well, they really loved what you preached down there, but you didn't give them any recognition, so they went somewhere else. And I said, well, God bless them. And I hope they find exactly what it is they're... Hey, we've got the you ought to be glad to have me attitude in the church a lot, and it drips with Cain. It drips with Cain. Give me a house full of Abels any day of the week that say, I present it as a living sacrifice. Here's what I am. It's who I am. And I just receive Him by faith. I say, that's beautiful. Receive Him by faith. Just receive all that He has by faith. What a lovely thing. But what is... If faith is, without faith it's impossible to please God, then we could answer our own question, what would be unpleasing to God? Be a lack of faith. What's the opposite of faith? Fear? Fear is good. The opposite of faith is fear. I really believe that the opposite of faith is works. Because it's you relying, or self-reliance, it's you relying on your ability to do. And you'll do and we do this all the time because we go to God and say, Lord, I've done everything I know to do. Did you hear what that prayer is like? Lord, I've done everything I know to do. I need you to do something. And what you really said to God is, I saved faith until step 14. I did all the other 13 things I could think of. And now here I am, Lord, and... Right? I don't know what to do. And so I'm just going to give it all to you. And it's like as if God says, okay, now that it's all broken down, wore out, you give it all to me. Well, thank you. Thanks, Cain. Thanks for the scraggy wheat from the field. Here's all I got, Lord. It's not a condemnation statement. It's understanding of who we are and the faith that we have and how to be pleasing to God is not the stuff you do. It's believing on Jesus. Can I give you an example of unacceptable to God? Because we have acceptable to God. Unacceptable to God. I was ministering somewhere, I think we were overseas, and sometimes the Lord will give us stuff we just never said it that way before, and I even forget I say it. Have to either go back and watch it or go read some notes. Maybe I jotted something down. When I get up to preach, it's almost photographic. So if I can write it down before I get up, I'll get it in there, and then it'll come out. And I may forget that I said it, but we're going back over some of the old notes, and I think it was in the Philippines. And I was ministering this little bitty brief moment on what it means to be acceptable to God. And the Holy Spirit had prompted me, tell them when they are unacceptable to me. And I remember as the Holy Spirit said that to me thinking, they're never unacceptable to you. And the Holy Spirit said, think in terms of covenant. I always work through covenant. So when would they be unacceptable to me? And the illustration that I got was Paul from Romans 7, who's in the middle of, he's spent the 6th chapter trying to tell you you're dead to sin, you're alive with Christ, consider yourself dead. And it's almost like he gets frustrated with the illustration and he can't figure out how to get through to them. So he opens the 7th chapter with a marriage and divorce illustration. And he says, and this is not Paul's diatribe on divorce, it's simply a metaphor. Paul says, act as if, consider that there's a woman and she's married to a guy and she doesn't love him. In fact, her marriage is terrible. But she can't get out of it because she's a Jew and she's not allowed to get a divorce. Women couldn't file for divorce as a Jew. So it's not Paul's way of saying women shouldn't be able to file for divorce. Paul was simply using the metaphor that Jews understood to teach the lesson he wanted to teach. And he said, imagine for a moment that she wants out, but she can't get out because she can't go get a divorce. So what's her only recourse? Die. That's what Paul says. Somebody needs to die. She either needs to die or he needs to die. Now, Paul never says maybe she should kill him. Any more than Paul says maybe she should kill herself. Paul's metaphor is simply that, a metaphor. She's stuck. That's what Paul's saying. She's stuck. There's nothing she can do. And then he leaves the metaphor in the natural and spiritualizes it. Immediately, he says, so Christ became her, us, and died in our place so that we would be free to get married again to Christ. Paul doesn't bother to use all of the points he needs because he just used them in chapter 6. What point does he need? Well, if you're dead, you need to be resurrected. But he just spent the 6th chapter telling you, you are resurrected. So the metaphor is meant to inject Jesus into not your marriage, your life in which you are trapped to the world system of performance. Do good, get good, do bad, get bad. And you cannot get out. You're either going to have to kill the world system or you're going to have to kill yourself. And if you you can't kill the world system. And if you kill yourself, you're gone. And so Paul said, so Christ became you so you could die to your old spouse and then resurrected you so that you could marry him. So as I was going through that scenario, the Holy Spirit brought out, and I bring to you, what is the only time when you are unacceptable to God? And it is when you have a ring on your finger from your other spouse. You're off limits. You send a bachelor into a room of potential bachelorettes. He needs to walk around. He doesn't know anybody. Before he figures out, ooh, she looks good, he needs to start glancing at the finger. Because what women are off limits in the room? The ones with the rings on. And maybe a few that hid their ring because they didn't want him to know they were married. But that's another story altogether. So who's off limits? Who are unacceptable matches? All those who are already married. They're unacceptable because they're not a bachelorette. They're taken. So the only time you were ever unacceptable to God is when you are married to the world system of performance. God cannot bless somebody else's spouse. You see that? So when you get freed from your first marriage and link yourself through resurrected reality to Jesus, never again are you unacceptable to God. God says, that one's mine right there, you see? See how good looking she is? He's talking about you. You went from reliance on performance, Cain, to total reliance on him, Abel.